Good day to all. Good morning to some. Good afternoon to others. Another year in the books, which I don't know if everyone else is experiencing the increased rate of speed that time seems to be giving us in our dimensional realities, but it's almost middle December, which means Christmas is basically here, which means it's 2025. So the last 2 weeks of December are for the most part, quite quiet for most people. And we always do something a little unique the last one of the year, the last webinar media thing we do, because we've had so much that has been covered. We've had so much that we've delved into in terms of content and emphases and all that. Sometimes it's nice to take your foot off of the gas of a very singular focused topic and get into something either a little bit more broad or shift gears entirely and come back to the philosophy of us who are on these calls, for the most part, are clinicians. And as clinicians, we fall into groups, and groups can be great things, but groups can also be things that allow us to prioritize efficiency over efficacy. And when we're in something, very seldomly, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but we've all fallen into this, I believe, very seldomly do we step back and examine the processes and the practices and the applications of the things we're doing to ask ourselves, am I getting all I can get out of my skill set? Am I giving my clients the best version of me? And am I even relating to my clients in the best possible way given who they are? So that's what I wanted to get into today, a little bit of a philosophical examination expose of the concept of harmonizing clinical interventions. Because the success we get with a client is not only based upon how well we can combine supplement formulations into a protocol. It's not the lucky guess of the diet that did the miracle thing for that one person, which was an individual home run, that isn't able to be replicated across the board. I think, correction, I think and I know that the art of client care is not purely science. We hang our hats on the scientific process to validate and elucidate things that help us better understand our physiology and our biochemistry, but the art of client care in many ways is more about dealing with people and seeing the patterns in people's realities that ultimately dictate what it is that created the scenario that they've come to us and asked us for our assistance with in the remedy of that scenario. I was recently out in Arizona and had a dinner with a few of our accounts out there. And it was one of the best conversations I've had in a long time because it was this sharing of ideas, sharing of insights, talking about best practices. And it came at a perfect time because it gave me, the impetus for creating this specific topic and the way I could put it together. So without further ado, let's get back into it with reflecting on 2024 thus far. 2024, in my opinion, has been a major leveling up year for the Master Supplements US Enzymes philosophy and families. We've created this base framework of the Master philosophy, which is a treating nothing but potentially applied to everything way of understanding the categorization of the different products we have in the different families of supplements and where to use them and how to use them and potentially how to think about creating your own protocol. So we've delved into the products and we've delved into the core philosophies. And because in the theme of our founder who passed this year, and a nod to him, he was always a man of science first. Let the science dictate the honor in which we make claims around things. So we've been very much honoring the true nature of the scientific aspects of health. And what I mean by that is the scientific aspects of health are never black or white. They are, the more you dive in, the more gray shows itself because the scientific aspects always, usually when examined deeply enough, yield 5 questions to every one answer you get. So figuring out how to honor the science and make claims that are not snake oil, make claims that are not absolutes when it comes to treating people, but teach people to be better stewards of the science and the content itself, and then connecting that with clinical matters, which has ultimately allowed us to take products and examine things like how does nattokinase really work in the context of cardiovascular disease? What is it enzymes are doing in a variety of degenerative conditions? So we have done all of this in the past year, and I want to thank all of you for making it possible because it pushes me to be a better person in terms of education. It pushes our company to be better in terms of showing up for the people that we serve and help. And ultimately, my hope is it's helping all of you in your client practice in some way, shape, or form share this with other people that you're working with. But it's an important thing to always remember that this info is an essential piece of the puzzle. The science in and of itself is the what. And the what is important because without the what, you don't really have anything in terms of a basis. But the science in and of itself is not the how because there's still so much that we do not know in absolute terms when it comes to understanding not only the human body, but what's going on in our clients. So for me, the perspective that's super important to understand is clinical knowledge and clinical expertise are not the same thing. And I remember I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time in Europe at conferences such as the World Microbiota Society Conference, the World Mitochondrial Congress. I remember being there, and I was one of the few clinicians, so I had a very specific bias to the lens that I was looking through. And I met so many people who knew so much about a topic theoretically in a very narrow scope, but all they did was research this topic. So to me, these are the people that become the stewards of science that elucidate the information that's valuable to us. And I've also been in scenarios where I meet practitioners who have no scientific backing or basis, but they just know how to do something. I don't know if anyone's come across that, but it's an absolute brilliant expression of genius, but the person can't necessarily teach you or explain to you what it is they're doing because they simply know from having years and years of experience of what it is they're doing and how the outcomes usually result in some sort of success. To me, this is the yin and the yang of the art and science of medicine and client practice. And the meeting in the middle is when you can merge the theoretical and the practical. But because we're clinicians, I bias us towards the latter half, the practical side, because the person steps into our office and they're asking us for help and to deliver a result. And we always have the benefit of the doubt if we've sold them on our services that they will stay with us for the first initiation or the first iteration of what it is we are doing. But the greatest challenge, and I think the greatest fear of every clinician or practitioner is what do we do when the initial plan doesn't work? What if we applied the general protocol and we haven't gotten an outcome that's positive, or worse, we've gotten an outcome that's negative? This is what I think is really important to understand. We have to be adaptable and we have to have a deep well of reserves of knowledge, but also various skill sets. But we also need to know how to do this and harmonize it with the person that shows up. So I have a fun little exercise for everyone to do. I used to do this in one of my nutrition classes that I teach because I'd come into class with this assignment and I'd have all these bright-eyed and bushy-tailed nutrition students ready to take on the world, not ready to learn the most painful lesson of all. So I want you to all do this for a moment. Imagine your current way of eating, a current diet paradigm that you align with and you feel really good with or you really like. Let's go to one that you really like. Let's think about the supplement regime that you're taking. All the pills that you grab in the morning, the potential little pill cases that you align them in or organize them in. Think about the gym that you're going to. Think about the exercise routine that you're going to that you've selected based upon your own free will and the schedule that most optimally aligns with the efficiency of time flow in your life. Imagine what you like to do in your evenings. You like to put your feet up, maybe watch some Netflix with your significant other, spend some time with the kids, read a book. So basically imagine all the aspects of your life as you know it and that you've constructed, then this. Imagine if someone changed all that with things that you were not accustomed to doing. Why I bring this in is because this was the exercise I used to teach my students to allow them to understand what it feels like to be a client, to have your entire world changed on you without your necessary consultation on how things were to go. Everyone complained. Everyone complained in the morning when their breakfast was forcibly changed, when they had to eat certain things at certain times of day, where they couldn't eat certain food items because they weren't on the diet. The whole aspect of this is to have us remember, at least I believe, remember what it feels like to be someone who's so set in their ways, that's created a life that has brought them to you and your office and asking you of your help, and they're so frustrated, they feel terrible, they don't know where to go, they don't have a lot of energy, they don't have a lot of bandwidth and tolerance, and you're just going to tell them about all the things that you're going to make them do that they're not used to, they're not accustomed to, they didn't choose for themselves, and are going to take a lot of time and energy in order for them to adopt and hopefully consistently execute so that the outcome is favorable, hopefully. This is why it's so important to understand the art of patient care. When I say, how do we create a coherent plan within, or sorry, a coherence within the plan of a person or for the person, that's the most important thing. It's the person that we're dealing with, and we'll get into that in terms of understanding how to pair some of these things and maybe quantify and qualify the person and what they're ready for. What changes to their daily existence must we include? Generally speaking, this is a statement I share with my own clients, and it's not meant to be overly profound. It's just kind of absolute and true, but it sounds very philosophical. Every decision you've made up until this point has created the life that you're existing in. So everything that they've done up until this point, if they are unwell or struggling with multiple diagnoses, that's what's created their scenario and their condition. The hard part is no two of those are the same. And the reverse engineering aspect of getting the person out of that is a unique journey in and of itself. How, as clinicians, do we take all the variables within what we want for the client? Because we have our ideals, we have our biases, our likes, our dislikes, the things that we think are absolutely necessary for them. But how do we make it client specific? Because if we're not able to do this, if we just impose our will or we just start shoveling all the cliche things on them, get more sleep, eat a balanced diet, get some exercise, but we're not considering how these things are inroads to the greater good of what we're trying to get the person to do in that shift out of their disease state and entering a healing cycle, well, we're not actually going to get success in execution, because this saying is the thing that I always remember when it comes to working with someone. The old saying goes, in theory and practice are the same thing. This is what I wish to explore with you by examining the different categorized inputs, we'll call them, the inputs of health when it comes to creating the output of health in our client by changing the trajectory and the direction that they're on. So to me, in the art of patient care, these are the variables of influence. We have some form of assessment. And what's wonderful about our area of health is it's not all the same. Assessed here, there, and everywhere by a multitude of practitioners, their relationship with the concept of assessment might not be optimal. But in addition, how is it you're assessing things, and what is it you're doing to gather the information that you're making a decision with? We have diet, which is the thing that everyone adds at the last moment. Oh yeah, just, don't eat these things. But how to construct a therapeutic diet and how to pair that therapeutic diet with a scenario that's being presented to you, I believe is a lost or a dying art, because the busy practitioners either offload it to someone else or they hire, a nutritionist, and there may not be that level of expertise when it comes to thinking about diet. Supplements, we've been talking about these all year. Why? Because we are a supplement company and digestive wellness is our jam. But that being said, all of the clinicians here are using master supplements, but you're likely using additional products of things that we don't carry. So you're creating a confluence of different protocol options based upon knowing how to best select a supplement given what it is you're being brought. Exercise and activity is another one that just gets lumped in. It's like, oh yeah, eat less and move more. Well, if that worked, we wouldn't have the body habitus that the average American has in this country that we live in. And, I do remember I am Canadian by birthright. It's not much better up there, so don't think that we're any different. But exercise is a stress, just like diets aspects can be stress, just like supplements can be a hormetic stress to the body. I think it's really important for us as health practitioners to know of these things that are other health tools to synergize with our plan, or at least have someone in your world who has the ability to communicate and educate you on the things that may be helpful to include or suggest to the person, because you're likely not the only individual that they may be seeing. Sleep, we've talked about sleep, but there are some very basic fundamental things of maximizing our sleep quality, sleep hygiene that we will go through. But I think the next one, I could talk about the next one for days. Stress and stress management techniques, like sleep, these are probably the most powerful driving forces of pushing the person out of balance. And then you get into the individual itself, the person and their personal life variables. How are they living? What are the details of their day-to-day existence of where their time's going? Client quantification is a cool thing. I think the rise of personalized wearables and various aspects of technology to help quantify what we're doing are hopefully starting to be utilized by the clinician, because when you can see the trends and patterns over gathering certain data over certain time frames, you can create lines and trend lines specifically to understand where that person's going under your care. And then there's dealing with the person and all that comes with them. So this is why I say we're starting with the who, and we decide what their, not your level of investment and engagement is. And from there, this is where I start in figuring out what it is my client needs, because as much as we are all human beings, thus we all have, two kidneys, one liver, one stomach, so on and so forth, the n equals one aspect and the individuation of the person and their journey is still the most important thing to figuring out the secret recipe to get them back to a state of wellness. So, assessment. What are you actually dealing with? Because symptoms are one thing, lab presentations are another thing, the person and how they're talking about their experience is a different thing. So, how do you actually determine the baseline of assessment? Number one, are they coming in with a diagnosis, a diagnoses, or a multitude of diagnoses rather, or are you able as a medical doctor to diagnose a specific condition that they're dealing with that they don't yet have named, because that creates a reality in that person's mind. And when you give them a diagnosis, the average person adds that as an identity tag to their sense of self, and they're dragging that thing around like, a very heavy chest or a ball and chain behind them, which I think has benefit to understand what's going on pathologically, but also on the personal side may keep them stuck somewhere, because I very recently had a very powerful and profound experience with this with a client on my own. Most people allow the diagnosis to be the only thing, and they might eschew the symptoms, but you have to understand symptoms are the way that the body and the body's intelligence speaks to us to let us know what's wrong. The hard part about symptom analysis is one symptom could be connected to 17 different things, and the same symptom is present in all of them. But if you understand the presentation of the symptom and how maybe that symptom connects to the dysfunction in the physiology, I believe it allows you to better understand all of the areas of the body that are involved. And when it comes to a supplement protocol, how you can triage the crisis care, the short-term alleviations of things, i.e., if someone's got digestive issues and you give them a glutathione and you blow their mind because they no longer have abdominal distension, well, that's a really huge win for the client, subjectively speaking. But you know that, well, if they have a serious gluten sensitivity and they're reacting to trace aspects of gluten, that means they have a gut lining problem, that means they have a microbiome problem, and they also have an immune sensitivity. So it's understanding that symptom analysis and then taking those things to assess where this person is in their overall state of health and their capacity to heal. Because someone has to be healthy enough to address the stuff in their body that's problematic, because the only way to resolve things that are problematic typically are to um, eradicate them. So if you're doing something like an intestinal dysbiosis protocol, if you're doing some sort of extreme detox, a heavy metal detoxification process, for example, those things require excess energy and they ask a lot of the body. But if the person in their assessment has not been deemed in terms of healthy, or do they need to be built up before you do something hard, that can actually be problematic. I have one guy I'm working with right now. He went to three separate naturopaths who everyone gave him the same, uh, what's it? I'm not going to say the company, but there's a company that does these detoxes, and everyone gave him the same detox, and they just made him worse every time he did it. He has no idea what he's doing, so he's trusting people. No one assessed if he was actually physically strong enough or his body was ready to detox these things. And this is where we have to understand what we're dealing with when it comes to the lab results or somewhat of an assessment and the derivative contextual aspects of that. Are you seeing someone whose system is extremely inflamed and dysfunctional? Do you have a base blood panel? Do you have some sort of additional functional labs that you're using to quantify how these systems are operating? And then if you look at the person, what's going on with them? Do they seem like they have good posture, good muscle mass, ideal body composition? Do they look tired all the time? Does their skin look gray? Are their eyes droopy? Do they not sleep well? And then we get into the point of the person's relationship with their condition and their affliction. Everyone here has probably seen it. There are people who like some elements of their disease or their affliction because it gives them a sense of self where people can focus on them. And sometimes you need to change the way that person looks at things so the things that person starts to look at are able to change in their life. To me, this is the starting point of the development of your roadmap. And you have to consider all these variables rather than just running someone through a predetermined ideal. Because again, if you're not assessing the person and all that they present, you're missing opportunities to potentially help them. Diet is one thing almost everyone will ask about. And as many people as there are on the planet, theoretically, there are that many potential diet variations if we want to be an absolute idealist. That is a very, very nuanced thing and probably not something that's going to fit into a busy practice. So I think it's really important to understand what is your philosophy of an ideal diet? What is it you think that people need? And you have to have some sort of personal opinion when it comes to choosing your diet paradigm in conjunction with your food culture and relationship with food, and then bounce that off of the client. The one thing everyone needs in their diet is nutritional density. What I mean by nutritional density is I don't mean calories. I mean nutrition in relation to calories. You can eat 5,000 empty calories in a day, or you can eat 2,000 nutrient dense calories depending upon the food selections. And this is a very obvious thing. The closer your food looks to nature, likely the better and the healthier that food is for you or for that person. When it comes to diet paradigm, there are some important considerations. For example, in the last few years, we've had the rise of these very extreme diets. You know, there's on one side of the spectrum, veganism, on the other side of the spectrum, there's carnivore. The diet typically forces someone to pick a side. It's like picking your college football team, you support them to the day you die. I believe that way of looking at food and diet is not healthy for someone because it's not about your emotions. It's about what works for someone. And if you're a true clinician, you can't have a horse in the race if the thing that works for your client is not the thing that you believe in. I.e., if you are a plant-based person and you've tried all the plant-based diets, but your client's digestive system does not get better, and you go, well, hell, I'm just going to throw a carnivore diet at you or a animal-based diet for a while, and they start to feel dramatically better, then the frequency of what that diet provides is what's healing the person. And your job is to figure out why is that? Is it the lack of food and plant matter and fibers that are actually giving their gut and their microbiome a break and resetting? Is it the ability to not have lectins and various food-borne components that are immune stimulants? Because typically proteins are quite low in those things, so they take the burden off of the immune system. Is the person been in a catabolic phase for their life and they just need to rebuild tissue, i.e., they need a small time period where they're hyper concentrating amino acids and lowering blood sugar and getting more energy from fats? So this is where it comes to the therapeutic aspect of food, because the goal is to give someone the opportunity to eat whatever they want. You should be able to have a bite of cheesecake now and again because being human and eating cheesecake is a wonderful experience. But if cheesecake sends you to the toilet for a day and then you're in bed for 2 days afterwards, that's a very special consideration. That person needs to be rebuilt. So, what's the feasibility of the implementation and what is the openness of the person to change? Because if they're not necessarily used to massive diet overhauls and you give them something totally 90 degrees tangentially from what they're used to, that's likely going to fall apart and cause some issues. So you have to assess what they're ready for and what kind of diet would be the best place to push them to and what speed you arrive there. Because the ultimate evolution of the person, at least this is how I look at it, as that person gets healthier, they become a different version of themselves. So the evolution of their diet and the availability of what they can do with their diet should change to mirror that journey. And I do think the diet is one of the biggest areas where you can get a huge benefit, a big momentum shift in the direction, but it is where you will bump up against your greatest resistances because humans are creatures of habit who like to do things born out of convenience more than optimal health and choice. And I'm the guy when I go to conferences, I watch what the health practitioners put on their plates at dinner, and I see people who are just unconsciously making decisions or they're just choosing to not eat well. So, how is it that you relate to food and how honorable and diligent are you about practicing what it is you preach? Because that matters for you and how you're actually relating to your clients. Then there's our favorite topic, favorite category of supplements. And I wish it were so easy that each protocol for each condition was as detailed as and complex as it needed to be, but you've heard us talk about this all year. My opinion, it does not work that way. Give me 17 people with the same diagnoses, and other than having the biochemical variables that are allowing the person to be diagnosed with said condition, all of those people developed those conditions, that same condition rather, in likely 17 different permutations with some carryover. So what's nice about understanding protocols is the value in a protocol is that it worked for someone at one time, so some aspect of it will likely work to some degree for other people at other times. It's probably where it ends because you yourself have to think about how to design a personalized supplement protocol if you're practicing functional and or alternative medicine. So what do I think about? Well, I consider first and foremost the diagnosis and the symptoms being presented. What is the body telling me it's struggling with? So what organs or body systems might be involved with that presentation? And what in the diagnosis connects to the core pathology in and of itself? What is atherosclerosis fundamentally? It's a hardening of the arteries, it's plaquing, and it's a narrowing of an area, but typically multiple areas where blood is being delivered to tissues. Well, what's involved in that? It's inflammation, yeah. It's immune activity, yeah. It's coagulation of the blood. It's likely a deficiency of oxygen delivery to certain tissues. So you have to reverse engineer these things and figure out what are the biochemical pathways that are involved. And identifying key nodes in the network of biochemistry can then help you link a product to that area of the body because what the product does is not heal the issue. The product provides the signal for the body to heal itself. And in that, considering synergistic aspects. For example, in the example of arterial plaquing, we know nattokinase is likely a really good go-to choice because of what nattokinase does. But what about magnesium? What about essential fatty acids? What about vitamin K2 or vitamin D3? All of these things could be considerations given how we assess the person and how ultimately we can hang our hats on our rationale and our ability to put pieces together and make decisions. And always consider requirements of the body at any given time. No matter what the scenario is in life and what the person shows up with, we are an organism that basically is a very intelligently designed aggregation of individual cells. What does every cell in the body need? Water, oxygen, amino acids, fatty acids, glucose, minerals, vitamins, specialized things here and there. If we're not getting those things and we're asking the body to heal, we're not going to heal if we're deficient in the fundamentals. That's why something like a protein zyme exists. If someone has an absolutely atrocious diet or no ability to digest their food, we have to do something to provide the body with what it needs in addition to addressing the actual clinical stress in the first place. And then there's the implementation of the strategy, the feedback and the adjustments that I believe mirror the evolution of the process of the person, where they are, who they become, and what their body is ready to work on at any given time, because that is really what we're trying to do. We're working with that person, but the person in the body and the physiology are not necessarily always the same thing. We have to know that someone may want to heal really quickly, but because they've been sick for 30 years, we're not going after mercury accumulation and things like that. We're starting with trace minerals, digestive support, and probably some probiotics because that might be all that they're ready to do. And the question becomes, how do you track supplements and the effects immediately or long term? One thing I love to do when I give my clients a new supplement is I do a heart rate of variability assessment before, and then 30 minutes after I've given them a product. And you might say, well, why are you doing an HRV assessment after you give them a supplement? Well, if that person's autonomic nervous system shows me a better state of regulation after I've given them a supplement, well, that means that their system got more anabolic, which means more healing opportunity. It relaxed their nervous system and it likely dilated blood vessels, blood flow, and started to deliver more nutrition around the system. That's working with the knowledge of how physiology interacts on a global scale, given a specific and certain circumstance. Then there's this thing we call exercise. This is the one area where most people say, oh, yeah, just, get some exercise and blah. What does that mean? How much exercise? For how long? How hard should it be? When do we start? When do we know how to finish? I'm very fortunate that in a life before being a health practitioner, I was an exercise professional, and I've never fully left having my toe dipped in that arena because I believe exercise on a person-specific basis, when appropriately applied, is the one thing that makes everything in the body better. Because exercise can do things other things can't to accelerate the evolution of our bodies in a healthful way. Tissue metabolism. Exercise causes the body to upregulate energy expenditure and therefore increase calorie burn, oxygen delivery, waste removal, improve mitochondrial function, enhance blood flow, hydration of old, tight connective tissue. If anyone deals with chronic viral or bacterial or fungal infections, ask these people if they have extreme tightness in their connective tissue, or not only around major joints, but even at the base of the skull, through the mid back, all along the lower back. The fascia is very much influenced by things like inflammation and long-term infections. And if you are allowed to move slowly and progressively through a greater range of motion, then those old, tired, dehydrated tissues can start to exchange fluid because there are certain tissues in the body that are not actually innervated with blood supply. So the only way they can actually regenerate themselves is through the application of force, which is why things like strength work, this is something called animal flow here, mobility, various aerobic aspects of exercise have the ability to regenerate old, worn out tissue because moving the body, moving the tissue flushes that area with fresh energy because of all that happens physiologically when we exercise. Exercise is also a great way to manage our non-physical self. Mental aspects of health improve dramatically with exercise. Exercise is one of the best ways to improve the generation of something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps build neural connections in our brain and keeps our brain sharp. It is very well known that people store emotions in their fascia. So moving your body through different ranges of motion, of flexing and extending, twists and rotations, that can also help you manage your emotional well-being, which always affects your physical well-being. So energy levels, strength, and physical ability, as we age, all of these things decline if we don't do anything with them. So if we know how to complementarily combine appropriate modalities for the person given who they are. You're not going to give your 65-year-old retiree suggestions to do a CrossFit class with, Olympic weightlifting, but you might start them doing some basic mobility-based exercises and some introductory strength training. If you have a client who has serious cardiovascular problems, you might want them to get a heart rate monitor and have them monitor the intensity of the aerobic exercise they're doing so they're staying in that zone 1, zone 2 area that is still beneficial, because if they go too high, it might actually be detrimental to them. So the mindful pairing of exercises and how to pair those exercises in the phases of healing also mirror what I've been talking about with diet and supplements. As the person evolves, what they can do, what their tolerant of, and ultimately the level of performance that they can unlock becomes greater, and that's how you know the person's moving in a great direction. Sleep is both simple and very nuanced and complex, but we have to understand that without sleep, everything becomes compromised, which I'm sure every client knows, but that still doesn't explain why they stay up to 1 in the morning watching Netflix on their computer in bed without proper evening eyewear protection. Sleep tracking is a wonderful thing because sleep tracking allows us to understand the trends that our clients are currently dealing with, and understanding the trends of REM sleep, shallow sleep cycles, deep sleep might give indications as to why they're sleeping but they don't feel rested. Sleep hygiene is quite fundamental and quite important. Sleep hygiene is the practice of creating optimal conditions and variables to allow for you to get the most restful sleep you possibly can have. Minimizing bright overhead light exposure, not necessarily watching a screen at night, or at least if you are using the appropriate eyewear to block the excessive blue light that the eye absorbs, compromising melatonin production and raising cortisol production. Ideal sleep parameters, temperature of the room, darkness of the room, the quality of the mattress, and also the materials that the person is sleeping on or sleeping with, even the quality of the air in the room. What you're really trying to do is teach them all the details with the bigger picture to be the circadian rhythm entrainment of the body. What I mean by circadian rhythm entrainment is approximating our relationship with light cycles given the time of year. When you get up in the morning, the best thing you can do is get some natural light in your eye, which the sun comes up earlier or later, depending upon where you are. And once the sun has set, honor the level of darkness that the world wants us to experience rather than having, extremely bright, high efficiency blue dominant light bulbs on right until we go to bed. Because even though you go to bed and go to sleep, you might not be getting restful, recovery based sleep. Now we move to stress and stress management techniques. And this first statement might make a few people laugh and think of someone. If your client tells you that they are never stressed, you're probably being lied to. I don't think there's a Western world inhabitant that doesn't experience some sort of stress that's driven by lifestyle variables beyond which our physiology was ever used to. But, now I say that in the sense of, well, if it's in our reality, it was meant for us. We just have to develop a good relationship with it. So I think everyone should become familiar with the general adaptation syndrome model by Dr. Hans Selye, who was he was a Canadian European endocrinologist, and he in the 30s came up with the stages of stress response, which is such a valuable base fundamental understanding of how the body deals with stress and all the things that happen each time a person goes through an acute and or chronic stress. Because stress is really the great disruptor, because it pushes our body into a necessitating compensation pattern in order for us to deal with the stress and then hopefully bounce back to a place of homeostasis if we're healthy enough. But this is where the problem goes. So a body in stress is a body in a state of what's called sympathetic dominance. And why the nervous system that responds to stress is called the sympathetic system is because it is sympathetic to the needs of the body. So the sympathetic dominance is driven into compensation in stages. What I mean by that is if we are able to respond appropriately to a stress, when we go to the gym and we lift a heavy weight and we get tired, we put it down, we recover and we do it again, that can be a beneficial stress. If we are under tremendous psychological torture in a personal relationship that is ever escalating, that is not a stress that we can respond from because we never have the opportunity to have a break from it and recover. So we're always trying to compensate in varying stages of chronicity. The initial stages of stress require us to tap into what's called compensation reserves, and we sometimes have an anabolic response. We have an overcompensation in our physiology, which allows us to heal from that injury and get back to a baseline. Acute stress is typically not the problem. It's when it becomes chronic because later stage chronic stresses, once they deplete our compensation reserves, we enter into what's called a catabolic dominant state. That's a breakdown dominant state because we're using energy resources faster than we can recover and accumulate them. So in the human body, once we enter deficiency, over time, that deficiency creates pathology. And what's interesting about the body is it's stress responses to different things are the same, only differing in the degree of reactivity. A physical stress, a chemical stress, an emotional stress, a geopathic stress, an environmental stress, what have you, all yield a reserve depleting response from the body. But the reality is we have to understand and assess what stress cofactors are coming together in the average person's life because no one ever suffers from one stress if they are ill. And it's an interesting thing that I have never met a client with a chronic disease that doesn't have some sort of psychological and or emotional thing that they've been dealing with their entire lives. And the inverse is true. When I meet physically healthy people, they seem to either be better at managing those things or they don't have them in the first place. So how do you assess your client's stress load, and how ready they are for not having stress be part of their identity? Because let's be honest, some people have to set the room on fire in order to be able to sit down and relax. And in the context of healthy individuals versus sick individuals, the relationship with stress is such an impactful thing because of the stories that they have and the stories that they're holding on to. And the last areas for me are personal life variables. What degree of this person's personal life is actually changeable? What can they modify? What amount of time can they dedicate to themselves? Are they single? Are they married? Why does that matter? Well, if you're a single person, you can be way more internally focused or focused on yourself. If you have significant others and dependents, how much time is left over for you at the end of the day? Are they a career-driven person? Or are they a personally driven person in the sense of not wanting to make their time about work? Because career-driven people typically put that over anything else. They travel a lot, lots of time zone changes. So the personal life variables of the individual have to be considered because if you ask a person who has 90% of their time leveraged, they're giving you 10%. What are you going to do with that 10% that's actually going to be executed and valued by them to adopt it into their lifestyles? And then how do you quantify these people? What I mean by quantification is ongoing tracking or assessment of your client's health. How do you create a system of lab sampling in a logical way that reflects time frames of changing in the human body? For example, using a blood lab, there's no point in doing blood labs back to back unless you have a potential outlier because every 90 to 120 days, the body's breaking down and resynthesizing red blood cells. So that's when you're going to see a change in the nutrient status of what's being carried around in that red blood cell. Do they have wearable devices? And if so, can you take that data on a regular basis, put it into maybe a spreadsheet, for example, and look at analysis over time? I love at home biometric testing with certain clients who are into data because it allows them to be accountable to what it is they're working on because they're getting this objective feedback. And then for the people who are more subjective, self-screening questionnaires, maybe a symptom analysis framework, something they can do on a regular basis because the more engaged and the more honest someone is, the more accountable they are. And then if you're getting regular data provided for you to track the client, you're having more accountability in that person's journey and their clinical aspects to allow them to see progress in the long term. And then there's the person and all that comes with them. And I think this is such a nuanced and fundamental topic that I'm just going to gloss over some of the more powerful things because for anyone who's walked into the office where they're asking someone for assistance, you're a huge part of their journey. And their journey can often be dependent upon the kind of support and care that they get because humans are very complex beings. We have shared patterns, and that's what's nice when you've seen certain things before, like, oh, you're the person who overcompensates for their illness and you don't like to see bad results on a blood test and you get nervous because you identify with that versus, oh, you're someone who wants to run every test under the sun because you want to look for all the problems that haven't been found yet. That's the individual expression of self. And as a practitioner, if you see a lot of people, it's easy to fall in the trap of lumping things together as they appear on the surface. And this is back to the example of, oh, well, everyone with same X diagnosis has the same manifestation, so they get the same treatment. It's like, well, that's a disservice to the person because you don't know at what level you're actually dealing with that person beyond the physical. How do you develop a personal and a therapeutic relationship with that person? Do you take the time to understand how their life works? How do they look at the world? They look at the world in a positive or negative way. Typically, optimistic, positive people heal faster and have greater success in healing-based outcomes. What's their relationship with their illness and with the concept of health in general? Do they have a support system? And what stage of healing are they ready for? People like to think healing is a straight line. I say look at the stock market, and that's probably a long-term trends of the stock market are more likely a better representation of that pattern and of that path of healing. So now that we've done all of these examinations of the categories, what I want to round out with today is how to create a multifactorial client care model. So the first question you ask is, what is being brought to you as a case? How are you going to gather your data? This is individual, driven by your practice philosophy, your training, your expertise, and ultimately how you like to initiate approach. The second thing is who's being brought to you. This is the side of figuring out, is this the person for me? Am I the person for them? And how am I going to get them on my side in terms of making them want to make the change for themselves first and foremost? So what are they wanting to accomplish and what are they ready for? Is it even a realistic goal in the time frame that they're asking? And what additional resources are you going to need for the task? Is the biggest area of their stress actually a lifestyle thing? And can you or someone within your practice have the ability to structure and implement something that's going to give them that initial success, which can then be built off of something where you create a more complex second and third based intervention? What are the baseline data gathering, labs, and biometrics? How are you doing that? How is it you assess and analyze your symptoms? And hopefully, there's a lifestyle, a diet, and some sort of activity assessment so you can see what this person's 24 hours in a day currently look like. So in that model, how do you select a diet? What is your rationale? When do you go paleo versus when do you do something a little more plant-based? Do you have to go all the way to veganism or do you have to go all the way to carnivoreism? And how do you rationalize that as a clinical intervention and to your client? Same thing with supplements. How are you building your base layers of support? What is the thing that you're trying to focus on long term? And what are the short term aspects of what you want to do to maybe alleviate the thing that they're coming to you for? They may say, oh, it's just, I have this chronic constipation or this chronic diarrhea. Well, you know that there's something driving that, but you want to make them, not have to run to the bathroom 8 times a day. How are you going to address the short term, what they're asking you for, while you educate them about the long-term shift in where their physiology is problematic? With exercise selection, the one question I ask is what is the least amount of unaccustomed activity they're ready for? If they haven't been in a gym in 30 years, then walking is probably for them. If they're in a heavy detox phase in their life, I'm not going to push them with exercise because I don't want to take the energy that the body requires for detox and use it all up by stressing the muscular system and the immune system. And then in terms of sleep modifications, what are they going to stick to? If you say, well, I don't want you to watch TV before bed, I say, well, I can't fall asleep unless I watch TV in bed. Well, Hedron glasses should be the first go-to, in my opinion, for their new lifestyle, or maybe a stocking stuffer for Christmas. And then there's the aspect of helping them manage stress, because this is the thing that oftentimes prevents most people from healing, because the stress is the biggest energy taker in people's realities, especially if it's something they're dealing with that's deep and ingrained in their sense of self, their identity, and their personality. Is it a solo endeavor or is it via collaboration? Is it them talking to you? Is it them talking to a colleague of yours, a health professional? Is it being part of a group, a support system? What about how they have led their lives has gotten them to this current situation of health? It's a very, very hard thing to say to someone. The way you're choosing to live your life is the biggest driver of the degenerative condition that you're experiencing because you prioritize X and Y over rest, recovery, sleep, and well-being. And the biggest thing to talk to these people about is what is their inner world like, the mental projections, the limiting beliefs, the stories rather they're telling themselves and the harmful perspectives they take on, because sometimes people just don't think they deserve the experience of healing first and foremost. So you have to take all of this and they have to invite this huge paradigm shift into their lives. And Can they be accountable? Do they have the support system given their current existence back to the person and what their life looks like? And you, as the practitioner, can only be accountable to your side. How are you going to track the short and the long term aspects of subjective data, the things that they report to you based upon how they see, sense, experience, and feel it, and the objective data of the information you're gathering based upon what their biochemistry and physiology is telling you that is really going on? What are they willing to do in terms of keeping track of progress, and what motivates them and what drives them? So that is hopefully something that was very useful for everyone to remind you of things that you've either been doing and reinforcing the value of them if it does resonate, things that you're maybe not doing that might be a nice evolution, introducing things that you've never thought of before. I really, really did appreciate the opportunity to share this one because I love dissecting this stuff and building it into a deeper understanding of not only the framework of how it fits together, but how can you execute this in your way and your style? If there's anything specifically, everyone here would like to run through, I'd be happy to dive into some, theoretical various scenarios with everyone. But I do want to thank you all for a great 2024. 2025 is going to be better. I said that in 23, and I think we were honoring that statement throughout the course of this year. We're going to get into some more nuanced and detailed stuff. It's going to be very exciting. So please do keep coming back for these. Tell your practitioner friends that if this information does resonate with you, we want to be sharing this stuff with as many people as possible because even though, this is not directly working with someone, hopefully the information and the intent behind this has the ability to help people get from a place of illness to a much better place so they can be better people in this world and help the world. And with that, we'll pause for any questions, comments, and critiques. Oh, and there is a question here. All right. There is no such thing as 0 calories, as your body has to use calories to metabolize what you consume. There is only plus or minus calories. Absolutely. Yes, all nutrition has both calories and cofactors in it, and hopefully they are together. Hopefully it's not just simply empty calories for the sake of filling your belly and getting energy, unless you're some sort of endurance athlete and you just need calories to push yourself through the marathon, the Tour de France bike ride, the game, what have you. Thank you for that.